Hello, my name is Brant Hutt. My channel is simply called Discerning What is True. We're going to continue a series tonight that is Psychology and Kabbalah. And we're going to be reading the chapter 33 of this particular book, which is called Psychopathology. This is all good stuff, good stuff to learn about who you are and why you're here. So we're going to get it. This is chapter 33. Again, the day is what is the day? The 15th? No, it's the 16th day of November 2025. So let me change one thing real quick. So psychopathology, everyone is familiar with the phenomenon of the phrase just before one falls asleep or wakes up. It is a twilight zone of consciousness, that is, where dream and reality blend. At such moments, since impressions can trigger all fantasies and images from the unconscious and generate sensual experience. This area lies in the psychophysical space between the jasad of the psyche and the da of the body just before they separate in sleep, or fuse prior to becoming fully awake, when distinction between the worlds is resolved by outward orientation. In some abnormal delirium, fever, or a refuge from reality. Sorry, I skipped a thing here. Let's see. Fully awake when distinction between the worlds is resolved and outward. In some abnormal situation, this process may be retarded so that it becomes an area of confusion, such as the delirium of fever or a refuge from reality, as happens in schizophrenia. The result for this situation is events can be simple or complex, but whatever it is, it indicates an imbalance within the body or psyche or both. In body-based disorientations, purely physical conditions can alter the brain's chemistry to produce delusions. Alcohol poisonings, for example, or excessive malnutrition will distort the ego's perceptions and allow the id and nefesh, or unconscious impulses, to flood the screen, that is, or yusad, to confuse the person with psychological generated situations. The disability is not so easily identified and corrected. Here is where therapists divide into Aristotelicals, that is the followers of Aristotle, or Platonius, followers of Plato. The pure mechanical naturally sees the problem and solution in the body and perceives all mental disturbances as entire organic. This may be true in some cases, but the question is, does the body create or respond to a psychological disorder? The very word dis-ease gives a clue in that something is out of its proper place, which is compensated by the malfunction of something else. Seen in terms of the trees of body and psyche, many diseases can be seen as referred malfunctioning as the corresponding level above or below the seat of the trouble. For example, the feeling triad of Had-Nasad-Yusad relates to the organ triad of Had-Yusad-Nezad in the body, while the Had-Yusad-Makut triad of thinking corresponds with the body triad of nerves, so that any difficulty in one will generate a resonance in the other. For instance, excessive worry can start stomach disorders, and panic thinking makes people physically nervous. Psychological disturbances can be permanent, you see, or transient. An accident, for example, often disorients the body and psychological trees for a day or so as the Yusad dot connection is lost. And the ego is deranged. Sometimes months are spent in this state after the end of a deep love affair. It is well known that divorce can disturb quite balanced people for several years, so that their perception of reality is quite distorted as their egos and emotional and conceptual triads take their time to steady and reorganize a traumatized tree. In most cases, the psyche will eventually bring itself back into balance, providing there is not a deep seated lesion in the person that goes back to their early years or beyond. As we have seen, the moment of incarnation is a traumatic one. Suddenly, one is confined to a small and ineffective body after being in a relatively free space and time dimension. So, what he's talking about when you come back and reincarnate here from the spirit world. The impact of the elements, gravity, and the fierce demands of the id, nefesh, that cohabits the body with the psyche most impose an enormous strain, which is initially offset by the physical and the psychological support of the mother. This backup is crucial and must have a profound effect on the totally dependent infant. If the vital needs of those first few hours, days, or weeks are not met, however, then the lower face of the psyche is often not properly welded into the upper face of the body tree. This could create incorrectly fused da-yusat or ego, so that the person is never quite earthbound or sees the world through a deformed yasada screen. In many cases, there is a correlation, as the individual early life usually provides the solution to the first problem that fate has set. The extra care given to most alien children is an example. Not all deprived infants become crippled in mind. The factor of fate, as fate does not come into many psychologists' considerations, even though it is the ground bed of life and explains why this person behaves in this particular way, and that the person in that, and that person in that, although they may be born within the same environment. For instance, even identical twins who are rarely born at exactly the same time are subject to quite different fates, in that they have to work out some ancient relationship in a new way, with each reacting according to their understanding of the situation. Here we have the factor of free will and different levels of development. For example, one twin might be only concerned with the material, while the other is preoccupied with the moral, so that one responds to their common situation by becoming a policeman and the other a criminal, as they take up the light and shadow of each other's super ego idea. The place of birth is not accidental, nor are the problems encountered therein. The fool might well be born a king and a genius into a merchant's house, or even the jungle. One spiritual giant was born into a carpenter's family, and another began life as a prince. Parents and environmental play their role, but more importantly is how the individual reacts to his or her lot. Figure 35, pathology. The undeveloped mind is composed of many elements. However, in some people, the balance is to a greater or lesser degree, and of a and of killer. I'm sorry, and of kitter. In this diagram, the left side could be seen as too strong and inclined to to generate depression, while conversely, it might make the mind manic if the right side dominates. An egocentric neurotic can be cured by a conscious effort, but it is more difficult with a sickness of the soul. The truly insane are beyond help in many cases, as they have little or no connection with psychological or physical reality. They live in a psychological bubble, which they do not want to be pricked. Keeping the dimensions of faith in mind and the facility of free will, which operates in the infinite as well as in the adult, there are the various phases that everyone has to go through. Failure to complete these phases can be the source of mental sickness or psychopathology. The first process is that of symbiosis with the mother. This critical period of infancy can produce, on the one hand, a overprotective situation if taken to one extreme, or naked deprivation on the other. Both will leave their mark on the individual so that as adults, they will either expect the world to give them what they want or believe the world has rejected them. Both types under stress can revert to having an infantile tantrum or resort to not suddenly, but sudden retreat. This is regression back into a condition of narcissism in which they became the egocentric pivot of their own universe. Such a state might be shallow or deep, depending upon choice and circumstances. Fortunately, the laws of karma provide many opportunities to break what could become a psychopathic pattern. At first, fate is often very gentle in setting up a situation that could solve the problem, such as meeting just the person, to help. This is often seen in the archetypal quote rescue and quote relationship of the saint and the sinner. If this chance is rejected, then the pressure is increased, so that a progressive, more difficult life circumstances is met, where people have become increasingly less sympathetic to the child's psyche in adult's body. It is interesting to note that such people often know exactly what they're doing, but choose not to stop their games because it brings their ego much solace. One sign is that they frequently move from situation to situation, endlessly recreating the same egocentric result until they come to a crisis point in which fate usually gives them the possibility to dissolve the problem and move on into maturity. Many recognize and seize the moment to cut the fixated knot that binds them, but some, wishing to hold on to their narcissistic view of life, seek to maintain it by entering a twilight zone in which fantasy and reality merge. As such, they are trapped between Asiya and Yisara, like early morning dreamers who are not sure which world they are in. In ancient times, such people were called lunatics because, like the moon, which is a symbol of Yesod and the ego, they circle and hang between heaven and earth without being in contact with either. In Kabbalistic terms, they are caught in the world of Yesara without any contact with the worlds above and below. All the foregoing applies in principle to each stage of development. The problems of identity, relation to parents, sibling rivalries, and social relationships rise in a definite sequence and are dealt with by adjustment, expansion, and absorption. If this does not occur, then the process is locked into a retarded configuration until the imbalance is resolved in the normal course of life or with help. If the difficulty is not recognized, then the problem can deepen with time as flexibility is lost and the tree becomes distorted and compensated by patterns that could generate symptoms of stress and then disease. In some cases, a fixation may show up as no more than a quirk in the personality, like collecting teddy bears, which could represent the lack of a loving father. In another, it might be noticeable enough to be classified as a phobia, I should say, of basements, which could be rooted in some earlier experience of being crushed in an air raid shelter, that is. A very common neurosis is evident in a person who is continuously but not seriously ill, which can be a way of getting the special treatment they were deprived of as a child. The problem of newlyweds often, for example, bring up this issue of parental models that each partner projects onto the other. In other words, this is your responsibility to take care of this, and this is your responsibility to take care of this, so to speak. This can cause a crisis in the spouse who cannot break out of reenacting what was interjected as a child. So it brings back memory, so to speak. Here's where the archetypal mother and father image inherited in the super-ego idea can shatter in the face of reality, resulting in the collapse of all marital expectations. Most neuroses are more than just anxieties. They are often the signs of conflicts within the psyche that depletes a person's ability to live their life normally, whatever that may mean. In tree terms, it is when one group of complexes or concepts blocks the flow of another or constrains one of the triads or sephira to such an extent that cannot function properly. Example of this is a overjudgment Jera, which constricts any allowance made by Hezek and its associates triads of intellectual assimilation and emotional expression. This could produce a neurotic tendency to be hypercritical or pernicky, so that the cleaning of a house or office becomes more important than it's being a home or place for creativity. Such a tendency might go back to pot drinking, but it can also be argued that obsession with purity is already inherited in the psyche and therefore built into the fate which is assigned to meet and deal with a problem that perhaps dominates the last life. One person, for example, remembers being a nun and was obsessed with keeping her house clean. Fate gave her an untidy but affectionate husband to teach her balance. Some signs of psychopathology may not manifest until well into the adulthood, when a person becomes responsible for themselves and perhaps others in work or partnership. In such cases, the sense of unease is often present long before odd behaviors indicate something is amiss. Frustration, disappointment, and setbacks are the usual triggers which start the process of regression that takes the person back to where the problems begin. It should say problem, not problems. If this is not seen and resolved, then symptoms formation begins in the tree, and the malfunction of the psyche increases as the three triads around the ego start to break down. For example, excessive moods or lack of feeling, thoughts can become obsessions or scramble, and actions inappropriate or disproportionate. Very often, disassociated from people and external events occur at the dot. The components of ego begin to fracture. This may be no more than a neurotic reaction under a specific tension, which may pass when the stress is eased, or it might be more serious than that. The individual is oblivious to what is happening and indeed believes wholeheartedly that their distorted experience is reality. This is where the twilight zone becomes the battleground between the ID, nefesh, or I should say id, nefesh, and the super-ego-idea, with the ego twits the two, trying to keep some kind of working stability. If it fails and chaos ensues, then psychosis takes over, profoundly disrupting the overall balance of the tree of the psyche. If the situation is fundamentally, then madness can eclipse the life. So we'll stop there with chapter 33 tonight. Hope that you're learning something here. Hopefully, and it's good to get in this book. This is all new for me, and I hope that you can glean the wisdom of this particular author who shared this long ago. So we're going to end that right now. So thank you for being here. Again, I'm going through the book called Psychology and Kabbalah. That was chapter 33, I think it was. Let me make sure. I don't want to tell anybody wrong. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Thank you very much for being with us, and we'll talk to you soon.